Hello, Neanderthal friends. Hello to all of you who continue to follow the journey of exploring ancient history, where early humans once left their footprints upon the earth. Today, in this episode, I will take you on a journey back through time. We will not begin with daily life or hunting stories, but from the depths of the earth, where the very first evidence of Neanderthal existence has been preserved. Each layer of sediment, each fragment of bone, each stone tool will appear like scattered musical notes, and over more than a century, archaeologists have gradually pieced them together into a symphony about a vanished human species. In this episode, we will travel through some of the world's most famous excavations, from the Neanderthal Valley in Germany, the site of the first discovery, to the Carpathian caves, from the cold Altai Mountains to the arid regions of the Middle East, and even the mysterious caves of the Iberian Peninsula. Each site, each discovery serves as a milestone, a testament that Neanderthals did not exist only in hypotheses, but left real traces upon this planet. From this evidence, the truth about Neanderthal existence begins to unfold. No longer a faint shadow in legend, they emerge as a real human species with a history, habitats, and a legacy preserved within the bodies of modern humans. Before we embark on this journey, remember to subscribe to the channel to accompany us, because your support and presence are the motivation that allows these long, slow, and richly detailed stories to continue being told. Now, let us begin at the very origin, where the first discoveries marked the starting point of the Neanderthal exploration journey. In 1856, in a small valley in Germany, a chance discovery in Feldhofer Cave forever changed the way humanity perceives itself. Between roughly 200,000 and 50,000 years ago, Europe appeared as a land governed by the harsh rhythms of climate. The earth exhaled through glacial and interglacial cycles. Every few tens of thousands of years, white ice sheets would advance from the north, sweeping across the plains, squeezing the valleys, and covering entire forests. The landscape transformed into a frozen steppe, the wind howling across the land, revealing hardened soil and thick layers of snow. On these lands, herds of massive woolly mammoths moved slowly, their thick fur trembling in the wind. Bison, with heavy heads, overturned snow to search for food. Woolly rhinoceroses struggled through the bitter cold, their massive bodies casting shadows upon the icy ground. A tableau of endurance and hardship unfolded. Then, as the climate warmed, glaciers melted slowly, revealing valleys hidden for millennia. Green returned, silver-barked birches stretched upward, oak and chestnut forests spread across the hills, and pines reached toward the horizon. Leaves quivered in sunlight, covering valleys with a lush green carpet. In this space, red deer appeared. Quietly, wild boars rooted in the soft, newly revealed earth, and herds of antelope moved across the meadows. The sound of life returned, filling the long silence of the Ice Age. Yet beneath the cycles of ice and forest, the continent remained restless. Young mountains shifted, faults echoed, columns of fire erupted from volcanoes, sending ash into the sky and scattering fine dust across the plains. Sudden earthquakes caused cliffs to collapse, opening dark hollows and fissures. Over tens of thousands of years, rain and underground streams carved limestone, forming vast karst caves. It was within these places that time preserved countless stories of life and death, waiting to be discovered. In the harsh cycle of life, death was never far away. Ancient humans sometimes fell by mountain streams, in snow-covered valleys, or at cave entrances. Facing death, communities left traces. of ritual, stones arranged around bodies, both as boundaries and as protection from prowling predators. Sometimes it was just a few simple stones. Other times, layers of soil and branches were carefully placed atop the remains. Yet not every death involved human hands. In moments of sudden geological upheaval, cliffs collapsed, earth and rock buried. Bodies where they fell. Floods from melting glaciers carried sand, rubble, and volcanic ash, covering remains layer by layer. These sediment layers concealed bones, preserving their forms and delivering them into the endless journey of fossilization. Time draped itself, like an unbroken, thick curtain. Rain fell over decades, water seeping through limestone, carrying calcium, silica, and minerals. In this silent flow, ancient bones absorbed these particles, gradually replacing lost organic matter. Flesh had long vanished, but the skeleton persisted. It transformed bit by bit, from living tissue into mineralized form. At that moment, an individual began a new journey, becoming a fossil. On the surface, the continent continually changed. Glaciers expanded and melted, washing away soil and adding thick new layers atop old sediment. During the next ice age, the land cracked, mountainsides collapsed, sealing the bones in place. With each upheaval, a new layer of sealing was added. Gradually, the remains were enclosed within nature's vault, dark, persistent, and sealed for hundreds of thousands of years. For tens of thousands of years, the darkness preserved its silence, until the 19th century, when this veil unexpectedly cracked. The picks of limestone miners rang out against the cliffs, breaking sediments that had slept since the last ice age. A section of rock fell, revealing strange shapes in the darkness. The dim glow of an oil lamp illuminated the surfaces of bones, thick, rough, yet distinct from modern humans. These fragments emerged from the earth as if carrying the breath of a lost era, from Enges in 1829 to Gibraltar in 1848, then Feldhofer in 1856. Each human remnant appeared in turn, echoing from the geological depths. They were not merely scattered bones, but messages buried by a vanished human branch. Within every layer of stone and dust lay a whisper, the return of the Neanderthal, not in living form, but through fossilized traces, reminding us of a closed chapter in human history. But today, I will take you back to human history in ways modern humans have never known or imagined, to uncover where our ancestors truly came from. Fossils found in layers of stone hundreds of thousands of years old reveal the mysteries of humankind. Southern Belgium, early 19th century. The land along the Meuse River was covered with pale limestone cliffs, where many miners were still carving chalk. In 1829, physician and anatomist Philippa Charles Schmerling entered a small cave called Enges. Carrying a dim oil lamp, casting a faint yellow light upon layers of soil accumulated over tens of thousands of years. Initially, the survey seemed intended only to document animal bones, but as the workers cleared each layer of sediment, human bones unexpectedly appeared. At first, just a few teeth, and then, one by one, a fragment of a skull had broken. Digging deeper, Schmerling and his colleagues uncovered a nearly intact portion of a skull, what is now called Engius II. Upon observation, he noticed that this skull did not entirely resemble modern humans. The cranial vault was lower, thick and heavy, suggesting a different morphology. Schmerling carefully sketched it, recorded detailed notes, and brought it back for preservation. The findings at Enges were not limited to human bones. Interspersed within the sediment were fossils of long-extinct animals, woolly rhinoceroses, mammoths, cave bears. This indicated that these ancient humans had coexisted with the fauna of the Ice Age, with the intuition of a man ahead of his time. Schmerling wrote in his notes, "Humans once lived alongside species that have long disappeared." Yet in 1830, European religious and scientific thought was not ready to accept a different humanity preceding the Bible. Most scholars largely ignored his work. Only later, as modern archaeology developed, did researchers date the Enge's skull to approximately 40,000 to 70,000 years ago. And when morphology was compared, it became clear this was a juvenile Neanderthal, the first evidence, though forgotten for over 2 decades, of another human species that once inhabited Europe. The small skull lay quietly in the Liege Museum, unnoticed at the time, but it became the starting point for an entire journey of discovery. On the Gibraltar promontory, where cliffs stretch straight into the Mediterranean Sea, winds and waves from the ocean have eroded the limestone over millions of years, leaving countless rock cavities and caves. This place had once served as a refuge for many prehistoric species, and was also one of the gateways for modern humans to encounter traces of a vanished relative. In 1848, while the British were reinforcing military fortifications on the rock, a cave called Forbes Quarry was opened. During the excavation, soldiers and builders unexpectedly discovered a nearly intact skull. Its low forehead, deep eye sockets, and prominent brow ridges all markedly different from the human skeletons known to contemporary medicine stood out. The skull was sent for preservation at the Gibraltar Museum, later transferred to London. However, in the mid-19th century, anthropology was still taking shape. Concepts of evolution had yet to be published by Darwin, and knowledge of humanity's ancient past was still obscure. As a result, the Gibraltar skull, though almost complete and clearly a mature Neanderthal, was not recognized for its true significance. Scientists considered it merely an oddity, a rare morphological variant. It was only decades later, when the discovery in the Neander Valley 1856 sparked intense debate, that the Gibraltar skull was re-examined in a new light. It became the second piece of evidence, and even more importantly, it demonstrated that the peculiar individual found in Germany was not an isolated case. A population had once been scattered across Europe, on the Gibraltar cliffs. The sea wind still blows through the rock fissures as it did thousands of years ago. Yet since 1848, the site had marked a new chapter in archaeological history, the story of a close relative of humanity, recognized but not yet understood, awaiting the era when science could catch up to the truth in the industrializing lands of 19th century Germany. The limestone cliffs along the Neander Valley were quarried extensively for building materials. The sound of hammers and blasting echoed continuously through the narrow valley, tearing through sediments that had lain dormant for tens of thousands of years, as if ripping open a curtain of time. In this intense activity, beneath dust and the echoes of machinery, an untold chapter of archaeological history began to reveal itself. In the summer of 1856, in a small cave called Feldhofer, miners accidentally discovered unusual bone fragments. Initially, they were thought to be the remains of a cave-bearer species once common in Ice Age layers. But as the bones were assembled, their form emerged. A low-vaulted skull, pronounced brow ridges, thick and curved limb bones, all markedly different from modern human anatomy. The curves of the femur, the robustness of the spine, the dense rhythm of the cranial bones all evoked a being that had once traversed forests, steppes, and glaciers of Europe, now preserved only in stone. and sediment, the news quickly reached Johann Karl Fulrat, a natural history teacher in Elberfeld. With the keen eye of a researcher, he recognized that these bones could not belong to any known modern human. Fulrat immediately contacted Hermann Schaffhausen, an anatomist in Bonn, through repeated observation, measurement, and comparison. They concluded that these remains belonged to an ancient human form, entirely distinct from modern humans, yet not wholly alien. The discovery sent shockwaves through the scientific community. At the time, Darwin's theory of evolution had not yet been published. It would appear in 1859. The idea that humans were not the sole form but had multiple distinct lineages was considered audacious. Some scholars insisted the Feldhofer bones were merely deformations of a modern individual, perhaps due to pathology or natural anomaly. More conservative voices outright dismissed them as the fantasies of overzealous scientists. Nevertheless, the name Neanderthal, meaning Neander Valley, gradually gained recognition, becoming the first scientific designation for a lost human species. Unlike the Gibraltar skull, which had languished in museum obscurity, the Feldhofer bones became the focus of debate, establishing the existence of an extinct human relative and laying the foundation for modern paleoanthropology. Within the narrow valley where the Dussel River flows between cliffs, these bones ignited a new journey. Every rushing current, every layer of sediment that fell, seemed to remind that the cycles of glaciation and warming, life and death, leave traces for future generations. From this point, archaeology entered a new era, the era of tracing ancient humans, beings who had lived and vanished, yet left an immortal symphony of European history embedded in the earth. From Feldhofer onward, Neanderthals emerged from the darkness of sediment to become central figures in the story of human evolution, paving the way for subsequent excavations across Belgium, France, Croatia, and the Middle East, where each fragment of bone, stone, tool, and tiny trace came together to form a complex ecological and cultural portrait of a species that had dominated Europe for tens of thousands of years. After the bones in the Neander Valley were publicized, the scientific world entered a turbulent period. While researchers had yet to find more evidence, the public and academic communities were drawn into a prolonged debate. Was this truly an ancient human species, or merely a sick or deformed individual within the modern population? The scientific atmosphere was tense, like a vibrating string, resonating with opposing viewpoints as new theories collided with long-held preconceptions. In that context, in 1859, Charles Darwin published On the Origin of Species. The theory of evolution, with its rhythm of gradual change over time, immediately shook the foundations of European thought. If all living beings transform along a timeline, could humans be exempt from this rule? And if so, Neanderthals might be the missing piece, an ancient human lineage that once traversed forests, steppes, and glaciers, now surviving only as traces in limestone sediments. Yet resistance was widespread. Many leading scholars, including Rudolf Virchow, one of the most respected figures in contemporary medicine, adamantly rejected the idea. Virchow declared that the Feldhofer bones belonged merely to a modern human suffering from rickets, arthritis, or cranial deformation. This view gained support as it preserved the image of humanity as a singular entity without a branching past. The debate extended beyond laboratories and scientific councils, spilling into conferences, journals, and even the popular press, where descriptions of the ape-man fascinated the public imagination. Between the 1860s and 1880s, a series of new discoveries emerged, from Belgium and France to Croatia. Each ancient skeleton excavated was like a piece of a historical puzzle, yet to be drawn. Some saw these as evidence of a vanished prehistoric race, while others attributed everything to disease or excavation error. Academic meetings became heated, scientific articles conflicted, and debates persisted for years, like relentless waves crashing against the shores of knowledge. Yet beneath these waves of controversy, a quiet current began to form. Field archaeologists, with the patience of long-time observers, noticed repetition, low-vaulted skulls, pronounced brow ridges, robust bodies. These traits were no longer exceptions. Gradually, the accumulating evidence forced science to acknowledge that Neanderthals were not merely individual anomalies, but a real entity in natural history, once living, hunting, moving, and leaving traces across the continent. Those years of contentious and sometimes bitter debate laid the foundation for modern understanding. Through dialogue, rejection, argument, and affirmation, the concept of the ancient human slowly took shape. The image of Neanderthals, once blurry to both the public and scholars, began to emerge more clearly, not as malformed humans or legend, but as a true ancient species, treading across Europe's frozen landscapes. The haze of academic uncertainty gradually lifted, revealing an irreversible shift in human perception and opening the way for subsequent discoveries from Belgium and Croatia to the caves of the Middle East, where traces of Neanderthals would form a vivid symphony intertwining archaeology, biology, and history. In the late 19th century, Europe remained immersed in unresolved debates. The 1856 discovery in the Neanderthal skull and a few bone fragments had shocked the world, yet quickly faced rejection. Many scholars argued it was merely a malformed individual, a modern human with bone disease, rather than evidence of a distinct human species. The idea that another human lineage had once coexisted with Homo sapiens was considered beyond imagination. In this context, any newly found fossil carried the weight not only of archaeology but also of prevailing prejudices. In 1886, on the limestone hills near the town of Namur in southern Belgium, scientists Marcel Dupuy and Maximin Loist decided to explore an ancient cave named Spy. The cave entrance opened beneath a cliff, where layers of sediment had accumulated over thousands of years. The space was silent, filled only with dust and fragments of stone. Each pick and shovel gradually removed geological layers like stacked pages, revealing a memory buried since the Ice Age. Within the earth, bone fragments appeared mixed with deer, horse, and other ice-aged fauna. Yet the discovery of two nearly complete human skeletons caused the greatest stir. These were not mere isolated fragments. They retained enough structure to reveal characteristic morphology: low, sloping foreheads, elongated skulls, thick limb bones, large, robust joints. These features immediately recalled the remains found in the Neander Valley 30 years earlier. More importantly, the Spy skeletons were not isolated. They were associated with Mousterian stone tool-shaped flint fragments forming cutting edges, points, and sharp blades. Traces of fire and broken animal bones indicated actual habitation. Spy was not just a scattered archaeological remnant. It was evidence of a community, a group of inhabitants in Central Europe. To the science of 1886, this discovery was a jolt. Strange morphologies could no longer be explained as disease. The repetition of traits at another site, across multiple individuals and alongside tools, shifted the debate. The Neanderthal skull was no longer alone. It was now reinforced by two additional skeletons in a different region, with evidence too clear to ignore. Asterisk from Spy, the figure of an ancient human became tangible. This was neither imagination nor a debilitated body. This was a lineage that had existed, hunted, crafted tools, and left traces in limestone and frozen soil. The Spy fossils became a cornerstone, opening the door for science to acknowledge that human history was more complex than imagined and that Europe had once hosted a community distinct from Homo sapiens. By the late 19th century, as Europe gradually accepted the presence of Neanderthals through scattered discoveries, the Krapina limestone hills in Croatia revealed an entirely different picture. Here, it was not a few isolated skeletons, but a densely concentrated population buried deep in ancient red sediment. The door was opened by Dragutin Gorjanovic Kramberger, a geologist and paleontologist, who meticulously excavated from 1899 to 1905. Within meters of thick sediment, he and his team uncovered one of the richest Neanderthal assemblages ever known. Over 800 human bone fragments belonging to at least several dozen individuals. Jaws, teeth, skulls, limbs all intermingled with animal bones, flint tools, and ancient charcoal. The site was no longer just evidence of morphology. It suggested a complex living space. Mousterian stone tools were abundant, with blades, scrapers, and hammerstones indicating a stable crafting tradition. Large animal bones are rocks, deer, horses, boar, clear-cut marks, evidence of butchery, marrow extraction, and resource use. Most controversially, some human bones showed similar marks, parallel cuts and breaks typical of marrow removal. This raised a thorny question. Did mortuary or cannibalistic practices exist within this ecological cultural landscape? Kramberger did not stop at description. He was among the first to apply advanced techniques of his era: X-ray morphological analysis, detailed skeletal comparison, and the recognition of the link between Neanderthal morphology and human evolution. In a period when Darwin's theory still faced opposition, Krapina provided a dense chain of evidence of pivotal significance. If Neanderthal and Spy hinted at the existence of a few isolated individuals, Krapina demonstrated a community, a population, a society that had once existed sustainably in Europe. The site. It contained not only skeletal remains, but also memories of fire, meals, tools, and even unanswered questions. From 1899 to 1905, the red sediment of Krapina gradually yielded bone fragments and tools, as if each layer of time were being peeled away. Kramberger recorded his observations meticulously, publishing numerous studies, leaving behind a data repository that modern science continues to explore to this day. Krapina, therefore, was not merely a discovery, it was a turning point. For the first time, the image of the Neanderthal emerged not as scattered fragments, but as a sizable population, a community large enough to reveal aspects of lifestyle, environmental interaction, and even the darker facets of prehistoric human behavior. This was evidence that Neanderthals were a significant part of European history, undeniable and not reducible to pathological anomalies, placed side by side. The Spy Cave in Belgium and Krapina in Croatia produced a more coherent and deeper picture of Neanderthals. Spy, with its two skeletons and stone tools, confirmed the existence of a human lineage not merely isolated to the Neander Valley decades earlier. The bones there revealed an adult and a younger individual coexisting and using tools within the Central European landscape. Krapina, however, expanded the scale. Instead of a few skeletons, it preserved an entire community with traces of habitation. Fire, food processing, tools, and even modifications on human bones. If Spy was like an initial sketch, Krapina was a large, detailed, and complex painting, where Neanderthals appeared not as exceptions, but as indigenous residents of prehistoric Europe. The repeated evidence from Belgium to Croatia, from west to east, demonstrated that Neanderthals were not a localized phenomenon. They were a species that once spread across the continent, adapting to diverse landscapes, leaving an undeniable legacy in the evolutionary history of humanity. From Spy and Krapina, the pieces gradually coalesced into the image of an ancient human. Yet the bones remained fragmented. Jaws, skull sections, limbs, all like letters in an incomplete manuscript. By the end of the 19th century, science could assert that Neanderthals were a real population, yet the specifics of posture, locomotion, and daily life remained elusive. Thus, at the beginning of the 20th century, archaeologists awaited evidence capable of providing a complete picture, an almost intact skeleton, revealing not only skull and teeth, but the posture, skeletal frame, and full body articulation. Then, in 1908, within the soil of a valley at La Chapelle-Saints in southern France, this evidence appeared. The discovery became a milestone, but alongside the excitement, a long shadow also fell, the matter of interpretation. The skeleton was reconstructed not only according to the bones, but also through the biases of the era. From that point, the Neanderthal entered public awareness, yet simultaneously became distorted, shaped by the observer's lens. Spy and Krapina had opened the way with evidence. La Chapelle-Saints opened a new era, the era of interpretation, of debate over posture and value, of human and non-human. A new chapter began. In the early 20th century, the Neanderthal picture remained incomplete. From the Neander Valley, through Spy to Krapina, the fossils found were merely fragments, skulls, teeth, forearms, femurs, or crushed bone blocks. Scientists recognized a repeating ancient human across Europe, but the precise form, posture, and rhythm of life remained speculative. Science required a more comprehensive specimen, an almost complete skeleton, to sketch its true appearance. In 1908, in the rural region of La Chapelle-Saints, 3 priests, Amédée, Jean, and Paul Boissonnier, excavated an old limestone cavity hidden among quiet meadows. Within the dark sediment, amid animal remains, shells, and stone tools, a human skeleton emerged, curled, its head oriented westward, as if in a sleep lasting tens of thousands of years. The space was silent, disturbed only by light footsteps, on rubble and dust drifting in the afternoon sun. The compact posture of the skeleton suggested something previously unimagined. This individual appeared to have been intentionally buried, a sign of awareness, ritual, and conception of death. The skeleton was sent to Paris for study under Marcellin Bull, a renowned anthropologist. In the laboratory, under dim candlelight and the thick shadow of the workspace, each vertebra, each fragment of skull was pieced together. For the first time, science held a nearly complete form, a large skull with a low vault, receding forehead, sturdy limbs, thick hip and spinal bones. This frame suggested a strong body, adapted to the harsh climate of the Ice Age, with endurance, suited for hunting and survival. Yet at the same time, a long shadow emerged. Bull, influenced by contemporary biases, reconstructed the Neanderthal in his own way. He viewed Neanderthals not as equals, but as half-human, half-animal creatures. In his published description, Bull emphasized the curved spine, the head, and a hunched gait. Neanderthals appeared sluggish, weak, unintelligent, distant from civilized thought, a portrayal diametrically opposed to Homo sapiens. In reality, many of the traits Bull considered primitive derived from the La Chapelle saint's individual itself: arthritis, spinal degeneration, tooth loss, and old age left marks on the bones. These were not representative of the species as a whole, but of a long-lived individual. Yet in Bull's eyes, and in the perception of European society, the hunched, limping, weak Neanderthal shaped a fundamentally distorted image of the ancient human. During the first half of the 20th century, drawings, books, and museum exhibits repeated Bull's depiction: hunched, trudging Neanderthals, worn down by time and harsh nature. This image spread beyond science into public imagination, becoming a symbol of a failed human branch. Replaced by Homo sapiens. La Chapelle saints thus carried a dual significance. It provided the first nearly complete skeleton, enabling concrete visualization of Neanderthals, their body, posture, and adaptation to Ice Age conditions. Yet it also cast a long shadow of misinterpretation, a bias cemented in social imagination for nearly 50 years. The skeleton was not only evidence, but a mirror reflecting how humans perceive themselves through the figure of the other. Looking back, La Chapelle saints marked the boundary between understanding and imagination, between material evidence and prejudice. It reminded that archaeology is not merely the uncovering of soil and stone, but a journey through biases, perception, and humility before the past. From here, subsequent discoveries from Shanadar to Kabara and other sites in West Asia would continue to illuminate the Neanderthal, rising above the darkness of distorted interpretation. From La Chapelle saints, the figure of Neanderthal, reconstructed by Bull, spread across Europe. Engravings, illustrations, and museum reconstructions all replicated the hunched posture, low skulls, heavy swinging arms. In textbooks, Neanderthals appeared as creatures bordering the animal kingdom, standing on the blurred line between humans and apes. This image became a standard, shaping how generations of archaeologists, anthropologists, and the public imagined ancient humans. The 20th century entered an era of invention and war. Yet in popular imagination, Neanderthals remained trapped in the shadows of caves, clutching crude clubs, walking heavily with vacant gazes. This image spread through books, illustrations, and even university lectures, where young scientists, raised amidst such depictions, became haunted by the failed human, a branch of evolution unable to compete, erased from the timeline by Homo sapiens. The hunched figure became a benchmark, a symbol for measuring progress and decline in human evolution. Even other traces, such as the careful burial at La Chapelle, or the suggestion of care for elderly individuals, were overshadowed by this bias. Small details, behaviors reflecting organization and ritual evidence of Neanderthal cognition and society were dismissed as exceptions or explained away as coincidence, instead of being recognized as evidence of a socially organized species. Neanderthals were portrayed as mechanical reflexes, primitive beings, lacking the cultural or intellectual stature to be considered equal to Homo sapiens. In novels, films, caricatures, and public exhibitions, the hunched figure became a symbol, a wild man, backward, embodying the crudeness evolution had left behind. This image was not merely the product of inaccurate science. It reflected societal prejudice and how modern humans affirmed their status by comparison. Neanderthals ceased to be a biological subject to be understood, becoming instead an emblem of failure, of not having reached the modern standard. Only decades later, with new discoveries in Central Europe and the Middle East, and the advent of modern analytical techniques, this shadow began to dissolve. Shanidar Kabara, Ahmad, alongside genetic analyses, revealed a more complex picture, where Neanderthals emerged as intelligent humans with social organization and impressive survival skills. Yet, for nearly half a century, the image from La Chapelle had bound Neanderthals to a false myth so powerful it transcended science, entering the collective social imagination and leaving a lasting imprint on the history of human understanding. Even as this image gradually faded, it reminded modern humans that understanding the past must pass through layers of prejudice, and that science must continually self-verify. Throughout the first half of the 20th century, the hunched Neanderthal image rooted itself in collective memory, a template difficult to dislodge. For decades, science repeated the shadow of La Chapelle saints, listening little to other signals from fossils and sites. Yet like the ever-changing flow of geology, archaeology too began to shift its gaze. From the limestone valleys of Central Europe, researchers extended their steps southward and eastward, into the semi-arid stretches of West Asia, at the crossroads of the Mediterranean, Mesopotamia, and the Iranian plateau. Caves with dense sediment preserved the habitation rhythms of prehistoric populations over tens of thousands of years. Here, from the mid-20th century, a new chapter began. Tabun, School, Kefsa, Shanida. Each name became a milestone, adding data while challenging old prejudices. Skeletons lying side by side, some showing Neanderthal traits, others early modern human traits, suggested a far more complex picture: overlap, intermingling, and parallel lifeways. From the hunched figure in France, the pursuit of knowledge now crossed deserts and rocky landscapes of West Asia, opening a corridor of caves and habitation sites where Neanderthal imagery began to be rewritten, with new layers of evidence. The Carmel Range facing the Mediterranean, with its vertical cliffs sheltering ancient caves, became a focal point. In the 1930s, beneath sparse forests and weathered limestone, an English archaeologist, Dorothy Garridand, her team embarked on excavations that would reshape understanding of prehistoric human presence in West Asia. They entered quiet rock cavities where sunlight barely filtered through cracks, and the still spaces carried the scent of ancient minerals, as if each sediment layer whispered a forgotten story. Tabun unfolded like a deep well of time, its sediment layers, more than 20 meters thick, stacked over hundreds of thousands of years, recorded cycles of climate change and patterns of occupation. Each layer, from dark ash to fragments of stone interspersed with animal bones, formed an epic engraved in time. As Garrett and her team handled each bone fragment and flaked stone, they sensed the rhythm of life embedded their rich breath. Each step of past inhabitants. In the intermediate layers, prehistoric human skeletons emerged. Skulls, pelvises, and limb bones bore characteristic Neanderthal traits. Low foreheads, robust frames, large teeth. Yet not all were alike. Some individuals displayed features closer to early modern humans. Looking at the stacked layers, the narrow space of Tabun came alive. Imagined hunting scenes, fire-making, seasonal cycles stretching across centuries. An enduring question arose. Had this land been a meeting point for two human lineages, or a place where a single population adapted and evolved over time? Tabern provided more than human bones. It preserved entire living contexts: stone tools, ashes, hunting traces, butchered animal bones. Each artifact served as a letter in an untold chronicle, recording seasonal rhythms, group movements, and hunting practices repeated across generations. Worn stones, polished flaked tools all testified to an organized life marked by patience, skill, and adaptation to the environment. In the context of the first half of the 20th century, when La Chapelle's hunched Neanderthal still haunted Europe, Tabern posed a challenge. It not only repeated Neanderthal morphology, but also placed them alongside early modern humans within the same habitation corridor. The Carmel landscape became a meeting point, where human branches encountered one another, interacted, or coexisted. Here, every prejudice about the failed human had to yield to biological and archaeological evidence. West Asia emerged not as a periphery, but as a central crossroads, where ancient humans passed, leaving layers of survival, social organization, and early culture. Under Dorothy Garud's guidance, the sediment, bones, and stones of Tabern became a temporal map, linking past and present, taking the Neanderthal story beyond the borders of Europe. Discoveries here illuminated morphology and lifestyle, while challenging long-held assumptions. The notion of a hunched human species no longer sufficed to explain the evolutionary picture. Tabern demonstrated that understanding Neanderthals and contemporaneous populations required a broad perspective where time, space, and environmental change layered together, composing a living epic of ancient humanity not far from Tabern. Also on the Carmel Range, other caves preserved parallel narratives, as if each layer of rock and sediment carried the breath of many generations. Skull and later Kofsa in Galilee opened a new archaeological horizon, compelling researchers to reconsider the entire human timeline. In the brilliant light of dawn filtering through the mountain gaps, limestone revealed a silvery grey, and cave hollows seemed to harbor dense secrets, waiting for human hands to uncover them. In the 1930s, Dorothy Garud and Theodore McCown's team excavated at Skull. They sifted through tightly packed sediment, gently separating bone fragments and flaked stones, as if reading a signature written in time. Here, several nearly complete skeletons emerged. Skull morphology showed high foreheads, rounded crania, and flatter faces, features reminiscent of early modern humans. Yet alongside these were still heavy traces, thick brow ridges, robust jaws, muscular features strongly characteristic of Neanderthals. The subtle blend of modern and archaic traits made Skull a difficult site to classify, where each individual bore the marks of multiple lineages, like a bridge spanning generations and species. 2 decades later, excavations at Kofsa revealed more than a dozen ancient human skeletons, dating from roughly 90,000 to 100,000 years ago. These individuals occupied a special place, early Homo sapiens, yet within the same habitation corridor once occupied by Neanderthals. Within the dark sediment, Garud and her colleagues discovered evidence of intentional burial, children's bones placed carefully alongside grave goods, such as deer antlers or polished stones, suggesting ritual and symbolic intent. These scenes opened a deeper understanding. This was not merely a site of survival, but also a mental and spiritual space where early humans performed behaviors beyond mere necessity. engaging imagination and notions of death. Schul and Kofsa thus became two pillars complementing Taban, forming a temporal and spatial triangle. On one side were unmistakable Neanderthals, with muscular frames and low foreheads. On the other, early modern humans with slender faces and high foreheads. And in between, mixed individuals, difficult to classify, where lineages met, overlapped, and intermingled. This interweaving challenged any linear evolutionary scheme, shattering the notion that one species simply replaced another in a strict order. The reality was more complex. Multiple lineages coexisted, shared hunting grounds, and adapted to shifting climates, environments, and resources. In the 1950s, scholarly discussions about Skull and Kofsa continued. Some viewed the findings as evidence for parallel evolution of Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. Others saw traces of hybridization, or at least geographic overlap between populations. Whatever the interpretation, one fact remained clear. From Western Europe to West Asia, Neanderthals were no longer confined to the shadows of La Chapelle-aux-Saints. They had entered a complex space where multiple human lineages left footprints, side by side, creating an unprecedented network of survival, evolution, and interaction. Sediments, skeletons, and stone tools told stories of overlapping faces, where the past was no longer discrete but intertwined like an ancient river winding through the caves of Carmel, opening a new chapter in human history. By the mid-1950s, in the Zagros Mountains of Kurdistan, modern Iraq, archaeologist Ralph Seletsky led an excavation into Shanidar Cave. Before them, a wide cave vault opened, sunlight filtering through rock crevices to form speckled streaks on the hard floor, while thick sediment layers preserved remnants of tens of thousands of years of habitation. Each layer, each bone fragment, and each flaked stone narrated a long story of life, hunting seasons, and the rhythms of time experienced by Neanderthals. This site yielded discoveries that shook archaeology and anthropology. From 1957 to 1961, 11 Neanderthal individuals were uncovered. Many skeletons bore signs of survival challenges. One had lost an arm, several had deformed joints from illness or injury, and some skulls showed significant trauma. What drew researchers' attention was not just the injuries, but the survival afterward. These individuals lived months, even years, despite severe impairments. Such survival could not be the result of solitary instinct. It required care, support, and assistance from other community members. Shanidar thus became vivid evidence of Neanderthal social cohesion, a society extending beyond mere survival, oriented toward collective well-being and mutual care. Shanidar revealed even more mysteries. Some burial pits preserved pollen traces. Detailed analysis showed the presence of multiple plant species, deliberately placed alongside human bones. While debates remain regarding the source of the pollen, whether wind, animals, or human placement, symbolic significance of these burials cannot be ignored. They suggest that Neanderthals may have engaged in ritualized behaviors, commemorated their dead, and deliberately selected and arranged materials meaningfully. These small details challenged long-held prejudices portraying Neanderthals as purely instinct-driven, primitive beings incapable of symbolism. In the context of mid-20th century science, Shanidar breathed new life into Neanderthal research. The image previously tied to the hunched posture of La Chapelle-aux-Saints, or the heavy features of Taban Skell and Kofsa skeletons, was now expanded. Shanidar offered a different perspective, a community organized, caring for one another. performing burials, and potentially conveying symbolic behaviors. It demonstrated that Neanderthals were not merely bone and stone forms, but cultural beings with complex social and spiritual lives. From Spy and Krapina to La Chapelle, and then through to Boonskal and Kofsa, each site added layers to the Neanderthal portrait, but Shanidar extended the story beyond morphology, touching questions of cognition and culture. It placed Neanderthals closer to Homo sapiens than previously imagined, a community with rhythms of life, capacities for sharing and communication, and rituals embedding their presence deeply in human history. The cave space, with dim light, thick sediment layers, and scattered pollen, became the backdrop for an epic tale of life, social bonds, and symbolism, where Neanderthals were no longer hunched shadows, but a living community, remembering and leaving traces for future generations. As the final sediment layers of Shanidar closed, debate about Neanderthals no longer rested on skeletons or skull shapes alone. The cave posed a greater challenge. If Neanderthals cared for disabled individuals, if they performed burials, then the boundary between a primitive species and an organized, socially cohesive community needed reconsideration. Sunlight, streaming through cave fissures, reflected off sediments, seemingly reminding us that old rocks still hold untold stories. From the Zagros Mountains, these questions spread through archaeology, infiltrating laboratories, journals, and conferences, sparking vibrant anthropological debates. In the 1970s, 1980s, the West Asian arc continued to yield new evidence. At Kibara, Israel, a nearly complete skeleton with the hyoid bone critical to speech structure was discovered. This delicate bone served as a small key, suggesting Neanderthals may have possessed language potential, no longer mere primitive vocalizations. At Ahmad, another individual appeared with cranial capacity exceeding the contemporary Homo sapiens average, intensifying debates about Neanderthal intelligence, cognition, and organization. These two sites did more than supplement data. They opened a new cognitive space, where each skeleton, artifact, and sediment layer spoke of social life, symbolic behavior, and mental complexity. These discoveries were no longer mere puzzle pieces, they were a direct extension of Shanidar's legacy. They demonstrated that Neanderthals in West Asia were not scattered or sparse, but a diverse, complex population living in groups with tools, rituals, and social interaction. Society, from traces of hunting, the careful arrangement of stone tools, to burial pits with grave goods, all painted a picture of an orderly, rhythmic, and meaningful life. From Spy and Krapina to La Chapelle, then through Tabanskal, Kofsa, and Shanidar, this journey gradually concluded the first century of research. Yet with Kibara and Ahmad, a new turning point unfolded. Neanderthal science entered a period where questions no longer focused solely on bone morphology, but directly addressed the core of humanity. From speech capacity and superior cognition to the thin boundary between Homo sapiens and an extinct human species, these discoveries promised to challenge every prejudice, turning the caves of West Asia into living archives where evolution, culture, and cognition intersected, and where the story of Neanderthals continued to be rewritten, layer upon layer. West Asia, with a chain of caves stretching from the Mediterranean coast to the Zagros Mountains, became a natural laboratory, where Neanderthals and Homo sapiens left parallel traces. At Taban, sediment layers stacked like a geological record spanning hundreds of thousands of years, showing that Neanderthals had taken root in this gateway region between Africa and Eurasia. skull, and kofsa, with early Homo sapiens remains, suggested another story. Encounters may have occurred here, where the two species coexisted, potentially intermingled, or came face to face. Within a biogeographically dynamic space, Nadar, with skeletons lying side by side, some possibly showing burial behavior, opened a new level of meaning. Neanderthals were no longer merely skull shapes, but communities with complex social structures. From Shanadar, this flow extended to Kebera, and a mud site where nearly complete skeletons with hyoid bones were found, and cranial volumes exceeded the average for contemporary Homo sapiens. Both sites raised challenging questions. Did Neanderthals have language capacity? Was Neanderthal intelligence truly inferior to Homo sapiens, or merely misunderstood through the lens of bias? Together, these pieces transformed West Asia into a crossroads, not only geographically, but from the late 19th century through the 1980s, this entire arc constructed a broader picture. Neanderthals were not an isolated group in the cold corners of Europe, but a species with a wide distribution, ecological flexibility, and evidence of complex social life. Yet, despite abundant archaeological evidence and skeletal finds, debates could not be fully resolved. Fundamental questions remained. Who were Neanderthals in the evolutionary narrative of humanity? Did Homo sapiens completely replace Neanderthals, or did the two species exchange blood and genes? To answer these questions, excavated bones and tools alone were insufficient. A new perspective, a new tool, was required where each fragment of DNA preserved in fossilized bones could become the key. By the late 20th century, as genetic technologies opened new doors, Neanderthal research entered another chapter, a chapter in which test tubes, sterile laboratories, and genetic data would speak where layers of stone and soil had been silent for hundreds of thousands of years. By the late 20th century, while the light of traditional archaeology still lingered over caves and sediment layers, a new door began to open. Scattered skeletons at Feldhofer, Spy, Shanadar, and Kebera remained still, witnessing hundreds of thousands of years of history. But this time, researchers no longer focused solely on skull shapes or bone structure. Within each fragment of bone, in every mineralized particle, lay another language DNA, the biological record of a lost human species, holding secrets unseen by the naked eye. Silent laboratories, sequencing machines humming under cold lights, produced sounds like prehistoric heartbeats. Fragmented bones from Vindija, Croatia, from El Sidron, Spain, every tooth or vertebra, were carefully processed to extract remaining genetic sequences. This was no longer traditional archaeology, where hands touched earth and stone. It was a journey deep into the cell, into nucleotide chains narrating genetics. The relationship between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, migration paths, and genes, passed down over thousands of generations. The first data shook scientific understanding. Geneticists saw in these DNA fragments similarities to modern humans, a trace indicating Neanderthals were not a completely separate branch, but had exchanged genes with Homo sapiens in the past. Gaps once thought closed in the archaeological record now opened. Neanderthal populations had migrated, settled, reproduced, and interacted with our ancestors in complex rhythms across Europe and West Asia's changing environments. Vindija became the first genomic draft where each nucleotide, each tiny sequence, was arranged, decoded, and compared. From this, scientists reconstructed a comprehensive biological portrait. Neanderthal populations not only lived in small groups, hunted, and crafted tools, but carried a profound genetic legacy still preserved in modern humans, subtle imprint of the past. Sido unadded another layer, multiple individuals living in a group, close kinship ties, evidence of processing human bones, indicating complex culture persisted in small communities. DNA not only explained origins and relationships among populations, but also opened the possibility to understand social interactions, inheritance, and even group structure, how Neanderthals organized life, shared resources, and cared for each other. The laboratory space, with cold white light and humming machines, became a modern cave where scientists listened to stories from tens of thousands of years ago. Each DNA strand, each gene sequence, was a living memory connecting past and present. Discoveries from Vindija, El Sidron, and other caves across Europe and West Asia placed Neanderthals beyond the shadow of mere morphology, transforming them into full biological subjects, a population organized, socially interconnected, and leaving a legacy still imprinted on modern humanity. From the caves of Europe and West Asia, Neanderthal history emerged into light in a way never seen before, no longer based solely on skull shapes or stone tools, but on biology itself, on the memory encoded in DNA. Fragmented genes became narratives, linking past to present, Neanderthals to Homo sapiens, forming an invisible bridge through time between individuals who lived tens of thousands of years ago and humans today. From this point, new discoveries were no longer just skeletons or stone tools. They became living data, a biological archive enabling reconstruction of evolutionary journeys, migrations, and even the final traces of ancient humans on this continent. The 21st century began with new questions, opening unprecedented horizons. Where does Neanderthal genetic heritage still persist? What consequences remain from ancient interactions between the two species? And could stories written in DNA illuminate all that stone and bone have kept hidden for tens of thousands of years? By the late 20th century, as daylight no longer shone directly into dusty caves, European laboratories became new spaces for archaeology. Here, there were no stone hammers, no thick sediment layers concealing hundreds of thousands of years, only the cold light of fluorescent lamps, the humming of sequencing machines, and the scent of chemicals from vials containing fragmented bones. Each bone from Vindija, Croatia, was cleaned, ground down, and carefully extracting ancient DNA, a biological memory thought long forgotten, where gene fragments preserve the breath of a vanished human species, yet remain imprinted in every nucleotide chain. Vindija was no ordinary cave. Fragmented bones scattered through Mousterian sediments. Just a vertebra or a broken tooth became living data in the laboratory. Each nucleotide sequence was decoded, assembled, and compared. With modern Homo sapiens, these DNA fragments revealed stories never inscribed on stone. How Neanderthal populations lived, migrated, reproduced, and exchanged genes with the ancestors of modern humans. Here, these fragmented sequences formed a draft Neanderthal genome, revealing the relationships among populations, genetic diversity, and even traces of hybridization with Homo sapiens. Each biological line, though invisible, breathed new life into ancient skeletons, animating remains that had seemed dormant for tens of thousands of years. El Sidron, Spain, presented a different rhythm. Deep within the Asturian forest, caves contained a cluster of Neanderthal individuals living around 49,000 years ago. Archaeologists found human bones intermingled with traces of bone processing and stone tools. In the laboratory, DNA extracted from these samples not only confirmed age, but mapped close kinship among individuals, a small group living together, hunting, sharing food, and interacting across repeated life cycles. Detailed analysis of bone modifications revealed behaviors never recorded in stone or bone, how the community organized itself, moved, and maintained the population in a harsh environment, including care for the elderly or disabled. Here, DNA became a kaleidoscope reflecting the social and biological life of the group, where each individual existed not alone but tightly linked in a survival network, to sites, to different rhythms, yet together they formed a panoramic view. Of Neanderthals, Vindige offered broad genomic data, biological map of the population. El Sidran revealed social rhythm, group organization, and life in small caves. Under the blue light of sequencing machines, in the quiet space of the lab, history was no longer sediment outside, but DNA sequences, a living biological archive, where past and present intersected, each nucleotide a story, a testament to Neanderthal existence and their relationship with Homo sapiens, from Vindige to El Sidran. Scientists did not merely observe the past, they entered a new world where DNA served as a guiding beacon. Laboratory spaces became modern caves, where cold light illuminated secrets tens of thousands of years old. These discoveries paved the way for the next stories, the final traces of Neanderthals on rock, remaining engravings, and their disappearance from Europe. Each nucleotide, each bone sample, was a step into a vibrant past, connecting time and space, leading science from observing surfaces to listening to the biological breath remaining from an ancient human species at the Rock of Gibraltar, where Atlantic waves crashed against silver limestone cliffs. Gorham's cave lay silent, like a time capsule never opened. Outside, the sea wind roiled, carrying salty mist into every crack, blending with the murmur of waves. Inside, dense darkness was pierced only by archaeologists' torches, each beam lighting smooth walls, thick with dust and sediments, tens of thousands of years old. The space felt like a separate world, removed from the flow of present time, where the past remained intact in every rock cavity, every fine layer of soil in 2014, beneath ancient sediments. Researchers discovered unusual engravings on the rock surface, intersecting grooves, simple yet deliberate, not products of nature. Ancient hands had held sharp tools, carving marks that time could not erase. Each scratch, each diagonal line, pulsed with the silent rhythm of another intellect, an abstract cognitive capacity still shrouded in mystery. When torchlight struck the engravings, long shadows and undulating rock fissures seemed to remind that Neanderthals did more than hunt or craft tools. They observed, reflected, and created symbolic marks, a language yet to be deciphered. In the quiet, amid the salty scent of the sea and dry stone dust, Gorham's cave emerged as an ancient library where the engravings were the final pages of Neanderthals in Europe. They were not ornate, not complex, yet carried spiritual rhythm, patience, and abstract thinking. These simple markings reminded us that ancient humans existed not only biologically but left traces of cognition, a thought process still not fully understood. The scratches became the most vivid evidence of the last Neanderthal intellect, a silent message across time. Together with discoveries from West Asian caves, ancient DNA from Vindige and El Sidran, the rock engravings in Gorham's cave completed the recent Neanderthal story. They marked the final phase of long-term presence in Europe. Based on Bayesian dating models, researchers estimated that around 41 to 39,000 years ago, the last populations gradually vanished, giving way to Homo sapiens, yet leaving spiritual and biological legacies potentially carried forward through modern humans. In the darkness of Gorham's cave, time seemed to slow. Each sediment layer, each carved groove, each nucleotide from other caves told the final story of a species that once walked, hunted, crafted tools, and left a spiritual imprint on stone. These final traces were not only physical evidence, but an emotional cadence, opening the next chapter, exploring the deep origins, migration pathways of Neanderthals over hundreds of thousands of years, and biological imprints persisting in modern human DNA. Gorham's cave, with its engravings, became a threshold linking past and present, where every layer of rock and carved groove resonated like Neanderthal's final epic. Deep in the mountains of Spain, Cima de los Huesos appeared as an abyss holding hundreds of thousands of years of secrets. Red-brown sediment, cracked by time, embraced skeletons like ancient treasures. Each bone, from skull to limb, was thick, solid, reflecting the vitality of an early Neanderthal population. Fossils here were dated to approximately 430,000 years ago. Illuminating origins, the Neanderthal branch diverged from Denisovans before this point, forming a long-term population in Europe, the foundation for many subsequent Neanderthal groups, from Western Europe to the distant Altai, where scattered bones once recorded the passage of time. Archaeologists entered the cave, flashlights sweeping smooth rock surfaces, hollows containing bones and stone tools. Silence was such that each footstep echoed like the past reverberating. Around them, limestone containing minerals, droplets of water falling from the ceiling, lightly tapping stone, produced a steady sound like the heartbeat of time. Each bone fragment was carefully processed in the laboratory, where ancient DNA revealed the genetic story. This population was not isolated, but ancestors of later Neanderthal groups. Remaining gene sequences connected Vindija, El Sidran, and populations in the Altai, creating a network of kinship spanning hundreds of thousands of years, illustrating migration, interaction, and community persistence in harsh environments. From Cima de los Huesos, the stream of habitation spread widely. Neanderthals moved along the Levant corridor, encountering Homo sapiens, leaving Africa sometimes intermingling, sometimes avoiding contact. Glacial cycles submerged plains and opened valleys, forcing ancient humans to traverse icy corridors in search of sheltered caves, water sources, and prey. The landscape changed constantly. Dense pine forests, cold steppes, silver-white glacial rivers sliding down from northern Europe, forming a network of life and death, where Neanderthal populations had to adapt to survive. Along this journey, communities seem to have developed survival strategies, organizing hunting groups, sharing food, and moving seasonally to find favorable environments. The geographic map of the Middle Paleolithic emerges through archaeological discoveries from the Iberian Peninsula with El Sidran and Gorham's cave, across the Alps to the distant Altai, where scattered bone fragments whisper history. In each cave, every sediment layer, Mousterian stone tool, and trace of hunting tells a story of seasonal habitation and migration, survival through harsh challenges, and the intricate adaptability of Neanderthal populations. Layers of charcoal, broken animal bones, and traces of fire all indicate communal life and survival. Skills that overcame natural obstacles. The narrative of migration is not only geographic, but also biological. Ancient DNA from Vindija, El Sidrón, and Cima de los Huesos connects populations, mapping kinship networks and proving that Neanderthals were not isolated groups, but widely migrating communities. Every step, every cave, every sediment layer constitutes a chapter in a living, epic, genetic, and cultural map never fully told. Remaining gene sequences also reveal hybridization with Homo sapiens, showing that genetic interactions were not rare and contributed to the biological legacy preserved in modern humans. As the last glacial ice melted and Homo sapiens spread into Europe, the final Neanderthal populations began to fade. Marks on rock, sediment layers preserving bones, and DNA remaining in our bodies are all that survive, reminding us that human history is not a straight line but a complex network of life, change, and migration. Every cave, every incision on stone, every nucleotide is evidence of the life, movement, and survival strategies of a human species that once walked the same lands as Homo sapiens, leaving echoes impossible to erase in our evolutionary epic. By the end of the 20th century, the scientific world entered a new era, where sediments, caves, and fossils told stories not only through physical form but through nucleotide sequences hidden in bones. The laboratory was silent, with only the hum of sequencing machines, cold fluorescent light reflecting off metal surfaces, illuminating fragmented Neanderthal bones, offering an unprecedented journey where past and present intersect in every nucleotide. Fragments of bone from Vindija, El Sidrón, and Western European caves were cleaned and carefully separated from long-settled sediments. Molecular biologists worked skillfully. Each fragment was ground, ancient DNA extracted, despite enduring tens of thousands of years in stone and soil. Previously scattered nucleotide sequences were assembled into a genetic symphony, revealing stories of relationships between Neanderthals and modern humans, and of populations that survived, migrated, and interacted across generations. From Vindija, the Neanderthal genome gradually emerged. Even from small bone fragments, each DNA particle recounted the life of populations in Croatia, hunting, migrating according to glacial cycles, and adapting to continuously changing environments. From El Sidrón, researchers discerned small population structures, close kinship, and group living sharing, space, and resources. Each DNA sequence is a biological imprint, linking hundreds of thousands of years of history to the modern world. These data reveal the potential to reconstruct complex behaviors, kinship relationships, tool-making, hunting, and organizational capacity within small groups. Analyses revealed an astonishing truth. Neanderthal blood persists in Homo sapiens. About 1 to 2% of DNA in modern Europeans and Asians carries the legacy of the last Neanderthal populations. Neanderthals are not only fossils, not just dry bones, they live on in our genetic code, reminding us that human history is not a solitary branch but a complex network of interbreeding and continuity. These genes influence immunity, metabolism, and environmental responses, emphasizing that the connection between the two species extends beyond morphology to affect physiology and health in modern humans. In silent caves, remaining physical traces stone, tools, animal bones, layers of ash are now complemented by DNA data, forming a comprehensive picture. Every archaeological discovery, from Spy to Schneider, from Cima de los Huesos to Gorham's Cave, is interpreted not just through morphology but through genetics, enabling more precise dating, comparison, and reconstruction of population connections. Over time, DNA becomes a guiding light, illuminating evolutionary branches, migration corridors, and zones of interaction between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. Laboratories became doors into the past, where human light penetrates centuries. Once discrete DNA sequences, when assembled, form a Neanderthal genetic map, revealing networks of relationships, migration routes, and population portraits. These data not only answer questions of origin but also pose new ones: the nature of interactions with Homo sapiens, Neanderthal language and culture, reasons for final disappearance, and which biological traces persist in modern humans. Ancient DNA discoveries transformed Neanderthals from the image of hunched figures in caves into a living, complex, and continuous entity in biological history. Each nucleotide is a narrative, a memory, a bridge between past and present. Each genome, cave, sediment layer, and stone tool contributes to a comprehensive picture of ancient humans, where culture, biology, and environment intertwine in an epic spanning hundreds of thousands of years. When the last ice sheets receded from the European plains, and pines and oaks returned to the valleys, Neanderthals left their final traces. No longer dense caves with crackling fires, nor skeletons lying amid ash. Only traces remain: tiny specks in soil, faint carvings on rock, and DNA hidden in Homo sapiens. Like genetic dust drifting across time at Gorham's Cave, Gibraltar, torchlight once more illuminated engraved grooves on rock, geometric cuts, crude yet deliberate. They evoke questions about the abstract thought of the last Neanderthals, ideas inscribed on stone as silent messages for future generations, evidence that intelligence and symbolic capacity did not vanish entirely with extinction. Thousands of kilometers away, in other Iberian caves, final bone fragments and stone tools tell of small groups living along coasts and temperate forests, clinging to food sources and safe shelters, moving with the tide, hunting seasons, and animal migration cycles. Bayesian dating from multiple sites indicates that around 41 to 39,000 years ago, Neanderthals disappeared from the European continent. The final moments were not a single event, but a prolonged process, unfolding over generations and small groups. Populations dwindled, retreating into high mountain valleys and enclosed caves, gradually losing their widespread presence. Over time, each trace gave way to expanding Homo sapiens, satisfying survival needs and opening new settlement routes. Yet Neanderthals did not leave the world entirely. In modern populations of Europe, the Middle East, and Asia, 1 to 2% of DNA remains Neanderthal, a permanent genetic testament, a gene controlling the immune system, a nucleotide sequence influencing hair, skin, or metabolismal echo from the past. Like invisible threads connecting generations, Neanderthals entered the biological flow of humanity, not only through fossils but through the very genomes carried by humans, a legacy embedded in every cell. Alongside DNA, Mousterian stone tools, traces of bone craftsmanship, and evidence of cave habitation have revealed a complete picture of lifestyle, hunting skills, and social organization. These final footprints, though faint, remind us of the persistence of a human species that lived, survived, and adapted in a harsh world, where glaciers advanced and retreated, animals migrated, and nature constantly changed. Every tooth, every crack in bone, every small stone toolage is a fragment of a story about survival, community, and creativity. Recent discoveries at El Citrin, Vindija, and Gorham's Cave help link the smallest details, from skeletons in Taban pollen traces at Shanidar to surviving DNA sequences, forming a historical network where each individual, each group, contributes to the broader story of Neanderthals. These findings emphasize that Neanderthals' disappearance was not passive, but the result of a complex chain of interactions: changing climate, the expansion of Homo sapiens, competition, hybridization, all weaving an ecological and evolutionary network we are only beginning to understand. The story closes but is not an absolute ending. Through fossils and DNA, Neanderthals persist in human consciousness, reminding us that human history is not a single branch, but a diverse, complex, and nuanced flow. The final footprints on stone, in sediment, and within the genetic code form a bridge between past and present, guiding us to a deeper understanding of evolution, existence, and disappearance, the elements that compose humanity's epic. Every carved groove on rock, each nucleotide preserved in DNA, each silent cave, and every surviving stone tool testifies to a rich biological and cultural subject, showing that Neanderthals were not merely a milestone but part of the endless current of life, from the Neander Valley in Germany, where the first bone fragments emerged under limestone quarrying, to remote caves in Belgium, France, Spain, Croatia, and the Middle East. Neanderthals' presence extended across Europe and Western Asia like a biological symphony written in bone, stone, and millennia of sediment. Skeletons at Engis, Gibraltar, Feldhofer, Spijkerpina, La Chapelle-Saints, Shanidar, Taboon, Skulkafza, and Kabarich individual. Each small group tell of life in ice, forests, amid whistling winds and rushing glacial rivers, where every step, tool, and trace evokes the silent yet persistent rhythm of ancient human life. They crafted tools, hunted, buried their dead with careful rituals, and marked stone and soil culture, faint yet ecologically and socially sophisticated, reflecting extraordinary adaptability to harsh environments. Over time, glaciers rose and fell, mountains shifted, ice melted, and bones, preserved in sediment, gradually became fossils for future generations to find. Every cave, layer of earth, and engraving on stone is a page of memory, a testament to Neanderthals' persistence and creativity. Modern findings from Vindija, El Cedron, Gorham's Cave, and Cima de los Huesos opened the era of ancient DNA, allowing deep insight into Neanderthal bloodlines. The remaining gene sequences in modern Homo sapiens, controlling immunity, body morphology, pigmentation, and metabolism, proved that Neanderthals never fully left the world. Every individual Neanderthal, every group living along coasts or temperate forests persists in our cells, blending into the ongoing flow of evolution. These biological traces transform each modern human into a repository of past memory, where history and genetics merge into a vivid evolutionary tapestry. This journey combines archaeology, biology, genetics, and natural history. It teaches that human history is not a story of a single branch, but an epic of many life streams, each living, vanishing, yet leaving deep traces. From the first light filtering through Shanidar's rock crevices to the silent rhythm of modern genetic sequencing labs, Neanderthals become a thread connecting past and present, reminding us that human existence is a complex, nuanced network where every trace, however faint, contributes to a story larger than any individual. In every fossil, every DNA fragment, every stone engraving, the story of Neanderthals still resounds like the drumbeat of time, reminding us that history never truly ends, it transforms, awaiting modern humans to continue exploring, understanding, and reflecting. These footprints, bone fragments, and surviving gene sequences serve as a reminder that life never truly disappears. It continues in the biological flow, in scientific memory, and in every journey of discovery we undertake. Thank you for accompanying us on this journey to uncover Neanderthals. From ancient sediments to modern DNA sequences, we look forward to seeing you in the next video, where together we will explore untold stories of human history, evolutionary mysteries, and the traces that nature and time have silently preserved.